Thanks for joining us for the workshop component of the 13th Annual University of Chicago International Education Conference on Democracy in Recession. Once again, just a reminder, my name is Krishna Kulkarni, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator at the U Chicago Center for Middle Eastern Studies. We're thrilled to have with us today Stephen Duncombe, a professor at New York University, who will be leading this workshop on teaching artistic activism. Professor Duncombe's interests lie in media, art, and culture. He teaches and writes on the history of mass and alternative media in the arts and at the intersection of culture and politics. He's the author of Dream, Reimagining Progressive Politics in an Age of Fantasy, Notes from Underground Zines and the Politics of Underground Culture, and editor of the Cultural Resistance Reader, co-editor along with Maxwell Tremblay of White Riot, Punk Rock, and the Politics of Race, and writes on the intersection of culture and politics for a range of scholarly and popular publications. Dr. Duncombe is also the creator of Open Utopia, an open access, open source, web-based edition of Thomas More's Utopia. He's the co-founder and co-director of the Center for Artistic Activism, a research and training institute that helps activists create more like artists and artists to strategize more like activists. For more information on Professor Duncombe and his work with the Center for Artistic Activism, please visit the website links that are now going to be provided in the chat box. And once again, I just did want to issue a special thanks to Stephen being with us here today and to all of you in a very busy and chaotic week. We hope that this workshop will be useful, and also please, given that there will be interactive components to this workshop, feel free to turn on your videos and unmute yourselves in those components. I have enabled that now. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen. Stephen, let me know if there are any tech issues that you face, and I will try to help.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for that long and rather lengthy introduction. I couldn't even remember doing some of those things, but that's the advantage of getting older. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this thing that you're putting together. And thank everybody out there for pulling yourself away from CNN for this period of time to actually focus on this, because I know that we're living in a very strange time, and we're living in a time where it seems like democracy itself is under assault in the United States. And so I thank you for your attention. But we'll come back to what we can do about democracy being under assault in the end of the workshop. But I want to start, I'm going to just start by sharing slides, and just so you have something to look at other than my face. And so please tell me if this doesn't work. So here we go. Okay. And there we go.
Slides are visible.
Great. Are they still visible, or did it just go down to one
It just
slide?
went back to, but if you do like Shift Tab or whatever the analog is on your keyboard, you should be able to navigate to a different window, and we're still seeing your slides.
Okay, too complicated. I'm just going to do it blind.
Okay.
Which is fine. So hello. I want to start with an exercise that we do at the Center for Artistic Activism when we work with artists and activists around the world. For the past 10 years, as Krishna has explained, I've been working with both artists and activists, trying to get them to sort of merge their talents, sort of to become more impactful political actors. And we've done workshops literally all over the world. Lately, we've been working a lot in the Western Balkans and in Western Africa around issues of corruption. They have a lot to teach us in this country, since we are now going through this as well. And but with wherever we are, we always start our workshops with a very simple question, which is, let's see if this can work. No, it's not. Hold on, I knew it was Tuesday. There we go. Which was, how did you get involved in politics? How did you get involved in becoming an activist or a political artist? Or what we often say is, what made you step off the curb? My background is actually as a street activist and a community organizer. And one of the things that we always asked ourselves was, how can we get people to step off the curb? And we meant that quite literally. How do we get people to step off the sidewalk into the street to join us for a protest? but we also meant it in the grander scheme. How do you get people to move from being a object of politics to being a subject of politics? How do you get them to actually step off the curb of inactivity to activity? So I'm going to ask you all the same thing. And I want you to think, it's going to take a couple of minutes, and I want you to put this up in the chat. What made you interested in politics? What made you, for those of you that think of yourselves as political activists, made you an activist? What made you, for those of you who think about yourselves as for maybe political artists, what made you a political artist? Or for anybody, what made you want to actually be engaged in a political process as opposed to just being a spectator? And I'll start with 3 stories that are the stories of myself and my co-founders and directors of the Center for Artistic Activism, just to kind of get an idea of what we're asking for. I actually grew up in a political family. My father was a civil rights organizer. He helped organize the March on Selma. But I had nothing to do with politics. My father was a religious activist. He was a minister. And I was a really pissed off punk rock kid. And his brand of politics didn't speak to me at all. I admired what he did, but it certainly wasn't anything that interested me. It was too much about peace and love and forgiveness. And then I heard the Sex Pistols. And I didn't even understand what they were saying, but I knew that they were really angry and I was really angry. And from them, I did a sort of stepping stone into more political punk rock. And then lo and behold, I became an activist myself. So that's kind of my story about how I stepped off the curb. For my co-founder, Steve Lambert, he was the victim of a unlawful eviction when he was living in San Francisco. And he had to go represent himself in court. And he realized 2 things. 1, that the court system was stacked against him. And 2, that landlords held all the power. And that triggered him into activism. For Rebecca Bray, one of the co-directors, also part of the Center for Artistic Activism, when she answers this question, she says, well, it's hard to actually pinpoint a moment. She grew up with 2 moms in a relatively conservative part of the country. And so she was always aware that she was very different, that she couldn't really bring kids home unless she figured out who they were and who their parents were. And that made her think about the world very differently as an outsider. So that is just some of the political type of stories of stepping off the curb, or coming out, if you will, as an activist. But I'd like to see your story. It's just in a couple of sentences in the chat. I'm going to see if I can access the chat here from here. Type in your stories. And Kristen, if you want to start with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, while we wait for those to come in, I personally felt like I stepped off the curb when I moved to India as a young person. I was born here and I grew up here, but my parents are from India, and when we went to go live there for a couple of years in my childhood, I, as a privileged person, witnessed endemic severe poverty for the first time in my life, and instantly recognized which side of the glass I was on. And I think that was a very powerful and upsetting moment for me, but one that was, I think, hopefully productively upsetting.
Yeah.
And Michelle, do you want to share your story?
Sure. Yeah. Hi. Yeah, I don't think I have one, specific moment. It's more that, as a kid, I was always hearing family members argue about politics at, Super Bowl parties, Thanksgiving parties, Christmas parties. And so just from a very young age, I was interested. And then, growing up, my parents always subscribed to the Chicago Tribune. And so even as a kid, sometimes I would, skip doing my homework so I could read the newspaper. And so I think it was just, I don't know, sort of always in me, that interest. And then obviously, as I got older, I got just more involved. And, today, I teach civics, and I teach a class, that I created, Global Citizenship, and it's all about basically getting young people to embrace their roles as citizens and be actively engaged in democracy.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Yeah, for sure.
I can share. I'll start my video. I can share a story.
Yeah.
My very first protest I attended, I was very young, is because my mom dragged me out on the street. But that was my first encounter, just like being in this mass of people who are very discontented with the way things are going. It's really eerie thinking about it now. So the particular protest was against this Article 23 in Hong Kong many years ago. So that was basically it making illegal acts of treason against the Chinese government. Which is a huge, like, kind of that was seen as a huge infringement on the one country, two parties, as one country, two systems model in Hong Kong. And it's especially eerie thinking about it now, because it's Hong Kong is now completely descended into this mess that it is now. And that Article 23 that many years ago was kind of the beginnings of that. So for me, that was like my first kind of early memory of, I guess, political activism. And I think in adulthood, that's just been accentuated by, been living in the States now and just seeing the descent of American democracy too, in many ways. So I think I've been getting a lot more interested in and involved in that way. Yeah.
And talk just a second more, if you don't mind, about what was it like to be in that mass of people?
I mean, it was like just feeling like you were a part of something larger than yourself. And I don't know, it's funny, like Hong Kong's always a crowded city.
Yeah.
But to like be in the street where the cars are supposed to be, and like I don't know, that feeling of like your body taking space, and you have the right to be, you have the right to take space in your city. That was kind of like a new thing. So yeah, I think that's a very powerful experience, just literal political act of taking space, right?
Nice. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Can we get someone else to share?
I can share. I'm Esther Peters, and I'm the Associate Director at the Center for East European and Russian Eurasian Studies. I think I also kind of, politics were just kind of everywhere around when I was growing up. My parents, were always talking about politics. They were always very vocal about when they would go about voting and going voting, and their polling places tended to be in my schools. So they'd always, I'd always see them when they were voting when I was in school, and they were active in different ways. And so it was just kind of part of it. I remember, watching debates. I remember very clearly the debate around the first Iraq War, so that was where my interest started, and then just became more involved. I lived in the Czech Republic for a few years, I literally arrived to live in the Czech Republic for a few years on 9/11. And so figuring out how to be an American living abroad in that time, with some locals in the small town I was living in, some American expats and some local Czechs, we organized a peace protest before the second Iraq War, very, very smallly attended in the main square. And then certainly after 2016, I just kind of, as I've gotten older, have gone from just engaged and paying attention to, finding just kind of that engagement has led to actions and different types of activities, I guess, and being not just interested, but engaged in the political process, at least in kind of the electoral political process.
Thank you for sharing, Esther. That's great. Okay, how about one more person? All right, we have some good stories to work with. So what's interesting is all of the stories that were related were all different. There were some similarities, the idea of growing up in a political household, but they were all different. And I've probably done this with 1,000 people around the world and gotten 1,000 different stories. So sometimes I get a little bit confused. So I created a little cheat sheet for myself, just to kind of help me classify things. I'm trained as a sociologist. That's what we do, is we classify things, we put things in boxes and so on and so forth. So I'm going to go through some options of, that maybe will classify some of the stories we heard. Okay, so I'll start with, hold on, see if I can do this. Did any of you say sign was how you got involved? No, I don't think so. Okay, let me try again. Receiving a pamphlet, like you're standing on the street corner, someone handed you a pamphlet, like, yeah, now I'm going to get involved. Yes, this is it. Or how about reading a white paper? And I actually write a fair amount of white papers, and so I always feel bad about this, but no one has ever gotten involved in politics as an activist by reading a white paper, I'm afraid, in all of my questioning. Sooner or later, I'll get someone. Watching a press conference. Sometimes that happens, but usually not. And then I always ask people, well, what got you to the press conference in the first place? Reading a news story, again, Chicago Tribune. But why were you reading the Chicago Tribune in the first time? Because you grew up in a political family. People are discussing politics, they're arguing about politics, they're around the dinner table. That brought you into a world where then you could actually look at the Chicago Tribune. Watching a PSA or a public service announcement. Can't tell you how many groups I've worked with where they spend lots of money creating a public service announcement. No one I know has ever become an activist or become politically active by watching a PSA. But hold on, let's just see. Going to a lecture, attending a meeting. Someone forwards you an email, or maybe retweeting a tweet, right? You get a tweet, all of a sudden I'm out on the street. Now, obviously, I'm joking here, okay? But in all the time I've done this, nobody said these things. Sometimes people say, yeah, I went to a lecture, but then I ask, how did you get to that lecture? Why did you get to that lecture? What made that lecture something interesting for you? Instead, what I hear is a series of different stories. Over and over, there's thousands of different stories I hear, but they do have things in common. They tend to be very experiential. The experience of going to India and seeing abject poverty for the first time and understanding yourself as a privileged person. They tend to be emotional. Things like being in the middle of an argument with your family, or what it feels like. Meryl was talking about this, the powerful experience of being a body in the street and part of something greater than oneself. The expensive term is these are affective experiences. These are experiences which are really about our emotionality. Now, this is problematic for most activists because most activists, this is what they spend their time doing. And I say that myself because that's what I did as a young professional activist and then as a community activist in my 20s. We wrote up pamphlets, we got people to sign petitions. We tried to get in the news. We forwarded a lot of emails, okay? And it's not to say those things aren't important, but no one opens your email unless you have some sort of experiential, emotional, and affective attachment to the information that's actually coming in. So in some ways, this poses a real problem for activism or advocacy because the communication strategies we often use don't link up with how people actually get involved or step off the curb. Luckily, there is a communication strategy, which has worked for about 40,000 years, that employs all of that, and it's art. Art works on an affective level. Art is emotional. Art is often an experience that one has. It's why when you go see, a performance or hear a piece of music that really moves you, and your friend says, "So what was it about?" And you try to explain what it's about, but it never really communicates the richness of what it's all about, because it is that surplus, that unexplainable or the affective element of art, which is what moves us. We say things like, "I was moved by that piece of art." Well, one of the things we were trying to do as advocates and activists is we're trying to move people, or as teachers, you're trying to move students to be concerned with things. And we have to think about how can we communicate using tools that are set up for that work. And so this is what we do at the Center for Artistic Activism. Been around for about 10 years, do a whole bunch of stuff, do research, do trainings. Now we're actually running a series of campaigns on trying to create a movement for free vaccines around the COVID crisis. And we've just come off running 10 different projects in 5 different states leading up to the election as well, artistic projects. But that's not what I'm going to talk about now. What I want to talk about now is, what is this thing, artistic activism? First, give you the theory. As it might sound, it is the combination of art. And we want to think about art in terms of art is something which generates an affect, that feeling I was talking about. But if it was just at the level of art, it wouldn't be all that interesting. I like art, don't get me wrong, but art itself doesn't bring about social change. It's art which is married to activism. And activism does some different work in the world, which is activism is really aimed at creating some sort of demonstrable effect. That is a shift in power or policy, things that are concrete and have real impact on people's lives. And so one of the things we're trying to do with artistic activism by bringing these two things together is create either affective effect or effective affect. We haven't quite figured out which one. And since both of them are really complicated, we just created a new word called effect or affect. We used to call it affect, and then we went to Scandinavia, and everybody said, no, we use that word, those letters all the time. It's So think of a Scandinavian saying and it's effect. And it doesn't really matter how you pronounce it. What it's useful for is a way of thinking about a practice that works on both an emotional and practical level simultaneously. And artistic activism at its best does exactly this. So what I want to do for the next 20 minutes or so before we go into the exercise is just take you through some examples that I find inspiring. These are just a few of the examples of artistic activism that are out there. One of the things that ourselves and the Yes Men have created is a database called actipedia.org, which has more than 2,500 different case studies of artistic activism around the world. These are just like 5. But I want to start actually not with contemporary examples, but go back a little bit to the United States Civil Rights Movement, because one of our premises is that artistic activism has been around for millennia. And in fact, when we do our trainings, we start with history. And we start with Moses, Jesus, and the Prophet Muhammad. Essentially, as people who were able to mobilize things like signs, stories, and symbols and experiences to both question the old order, but also propose a new order. I'm going to skip up a couple thousand years to the US Civil Rights Movement, just because I think that the US Civil Rights Movement were masters at activism. And we wouldn't think of them as artists, but there was an art to their activism which was profound. I'm blanking on his name, one of my favorite, Doug McAdams, who's one of the great civil rights historians, once said that Dr. Martin Luther King had a genius for strategic dramaturgy. But it wasn't just King that had it, it was the entire civil rights movement. So I'm going to show you some pictures. They're going to be familiar, but give you a different frame in which to look at these pictures, or a different lens to understand this history. So here's, my kids are in school, they do a unit on the civil rights movement, and this is who they see, the Reverend Martin Luther King, sort of, paragon of virtue and, intelligence and compassion and a great leader. And he was all of that. But the strength of the civil rights movement was this, okay? It was the people around the civil rights movement. But it's also the culture.
When you go, when I'll go with you. Let my people go. Go down, Moses. Way down, Moses.
The Black Church created a cultural reservoir that was absolutely essential to the civil rights movement. It created the signs, it created the stories, it created the songs, it created the community that was moved from the church to the streets almost seamlessly. But it was very important to have those things because in any sort of struggle, you're always building from foundations, particularly a struggle like the civil rights movement, which was so dramatic, so bold, so absolutely frightening. To take on white supremacy, violent white supremacy, one had to be able to believe deep in one's soul that one could do it. And so if you look back into the Bible and you see how the Israelites were able to come out of the land of Egypt and drown the Pharaoh in the Red Sea, and you identify yourself with Israelites, we know how that story ends. You make it to the promised land. If you get thrown in jail and under brutal conditions, well, you have songs to sing, which are about songs of freedom. And those cultural roots of the civil rights movement were absolutely essential for its strength. But it wasn't just about drawing from culture that made the civil rights movement so interesting in terms of bringing a sort of artistic practice to an activist practice, but they would create cultures as well. So we all know this picture. This is Rosa Parks, 1955, Montgomery, Alabama. As the story goes, she gets onto the bus, tired from a long day's work as a seamstress, and sits down and refuses to get her seat up to a black man, as was the custom in the law, and a white man, which is the custom in the law of the time. And here's the wide shot of that picture, and so on. Now, to this audience, I probably need to explain that that is just a story. In fact, Rosa Parks was not some political innocent. She was a committed political activist. She'd been trained at the Highland Center. She came from a political family. She later moved to, I believe, Detroit, and became part of the Black Power movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement. She was selected because she was a disciplined activist. She was the secretary of the local NAACP at that time. And so the story of her being just this every woman was a manufactured story by the civil rights movement. Which here's the iconic photo. And here's this guy back here, right? You know, I used to look at this picture when I was in high school, and I just figured this dude right here was the white guy who she didn't give her seat up to. And then as I became an activist and became a scholar, I did a little bit more research, and it turns out that's not who he is at all. He is a reporter. The other thing I always thought was this was the day. This was the day that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. But of course, that's impossible. They're not going to let a photographer on the bus at that point. It wasn't that day. It was a year later. This photograph was entirely staged. It was staged a year later in commemoration of that time, but it becomes the iconic photograph of that moment. The guy sitting in back as this contrast, he's not some white bigot. He's a sympathetic reporter who the photographer said, we need some contrast here. Get on the bus, white guy. Stand right there, and boom, we've got the iconic picture. Now, does that mean it's a phony picture? No, it's not a phony picture. Rosa Parks really was a seamstress. She was an activist, but she was also a seamstress. She really was tired that day. And Black people really were supposed to give up their seats and go to the back of the bus. But what the civil rights movement was brilliant at is staging reality so it could be photographed. Staging reality so it could become a sympathetic story. Not making it up, but staging it. And we also see this 10 years later in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which is Martin Luther King's organization, campaigned to desegregate Birmingham, Alabama. And probably most of you know these pictures. Kids being hauled off to jail, peaceful protesters being sprayed by the fire department, and so on and so forth. Those were the pictures which went around the entire world. Very important at this moment. The United States is engaged in a Cold War with Russia, the Soviet Union, and both are jockeying to be represented as the governments of their people. This is a huge embarrassment to the United States. on an international scale. It brought public attention to the civil rights struggle in the South in ways that never had happened before in the United States. And within 1 year, the Civil Rights Act had passed. Not just because of this, obviously, but this was one of the things which pressured the government into passing the civil rights law. Now, that's a pretty well-known story. The probably less well-known story is that this exact same protest was staged a year earlier, and it failed. It failed because they did it in a different town in Georgia. And the police chief of that town very peacefully locked everybody up, put them in different jails all around Georgia, and let them out at different times. There was no story. And without any story, for most of the world, there was no struggle. And so Martin Luther King and his lieutenants sat down and said, well, we're going to do this again, but we're going to do it differently. And they picked Birmingham, Alabama, partially because Birmingham had a long history of civil rights movement, had good labor history, but primarily they picked it because this guy, Bull Connor, over on the left there, who was the head of public safety, which meant he controlled the police department. He also controlled the fire department. And he was an out and out racist, former Klansman, part of the White Citizens Council. And they wagered that he would overreact. And that's exactly what he did. And he created these pictures. What the civil rights movement understood is that you need to make the invisible visible. White supremacy and the violence of white supremacy is something that every Black citizen understood. It's something that most Black citizens felt and were victims of. But it happened at night. It happened in the Black neighborhoods. It happened in the alleys. It didn't happen in front of international news cameras. And what they realized what they had to do is to bring that violence out in front of a public. And so they staged it. One more example of the staging of reality. These are the famous lunch counter sit-ins earlier in the 1960s, sponsored by the, or organized by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And we're probably familiar with these shots as well. Again, they're part of civil rights history of people being abused at a lunch counter when they sat down to demand the desegregation of these lunch counters. Then I came across these pictures about 2 years ago in an old Life magazine. And what these pictures were the trainings for this. In order to do this and have it be effective, what these activists understood is they needed to present a certain image. And so they would practice having smoke blown in their faces, or having hot coffee spilled on their laps, or having cigarettes tapped on their foreheads. In other words, it wasn't some spontaneous, I am angry, I am going to sit down and stand up for my rights. That's sort of the myth of how activism happens. It was a planned performance. They thought of protest as something which is performed. We use the word demonstration often in the activist world to say, I'm going to go to a demonstration, or I'm going to organize a demonstration. The word is really interesting, and it works also in Spanish and French and other languages too, as manifestación and so on, which means that it actually demonstrates something. And so what they understood is they needed to demonstrate the violence of white supremacy, and they needed to demonstrate their own dignity through that demonstration. And how they could do that is to treat essentially their protest as a performance piece. And it's what they did. Now I want to skip up to the present and look at a few examples. I like this one because it's so simple. This is an artist named Candy Chang. And Candy was living in New Orleans when it flooded from Hurricane Katrina. And as the floodwaters receded, there was all these buildings that were ruined, boarded up, and the discussion started, how should we rebuild New Orleans? But of course, that discussion was only taking place amongst urban planners, politicians, and other elites. And everyday people of New Orleans were not being asked what they wanted to have rebuilt and how they wanted to rebuild it. So Candy did something incredibly simple. She took those little things you get at conferences, back when we used to really go to conferences in person, that says, hello, my name is, and she got them printed up that said, I wish this was. And then she put them on abandoned buildings. And people wrote on them. I wish this was a butcher shop or a bakery. And then someone else writes, if you can get us financing, I will do the baking. Wish it was a community center. And people started voting. I wish this was repaired. Real soul food, something different. A Chinese restaurant. I wish this was a home. And what's beautiful about this is it gave a public forum for people to become citizens. To say that my voice matters because I live here. I have a right to this city because this is my city. Now, the impact of this is questionable, okay? Candy is an artist. She's not a political organizer. But it was the beginnings of something where people could create a space to imagine that they should be consulted in a process like this. Okay, this probably is an example of something that had much greater impact. And this is a rapper from Tunisia named Reyes Lebled, and I probably butchered his name. But this was the time of the uprising. And in Tunisia during Arab Spring. And it was a time in which a young activist had been murdered. People were on the street, but they didn't, because they'd been living under a dictatorship for so long, they didn't have a vocabulary to express what they were feeling. And so this young rapper, who was then later arrested for this, arrested twice actually, came out with this song. And it swept through the youth population, so popular that people chanted it at demonstrations and rallies. And it's very important, and I'll get to this also with the next example, that it was in rap music, because that was the language of young people, as opposed to political speak, which was the language of the corrupt politicians. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of this video with the English subtitles. An Arabic friend said the subtitles are pretty bad, but for those of you that don't speak Arabic, this is the best we're going to do.
ايش بك ايش بك خلك تحكي لي فيك تحب تكون بحاجه ها
رئيس البلاد هاني اليوم نحكي معاك باسمي واسم الشعب الكل اللي عايش في الاحلام 2011 مازال فما شكون يموت بالجوع حاب يخدم باش يعيش لكن صوته مش مسموع اهبط للشارع وشوف العباد ولا وحوش شوف الحاكم بالمتراك تاكا تاك ما على بالوش مادام ما فما حد باش يقول له كلمة لا حتى القانون اللي في الدستور نفخه وشرب ماه كل نهار نسمع قضية ركبوها له بالسيف فرطان الحاكم يعرف اللي هو عبد نظيف نشوف في اللحلاش تهرب في نسال ما تحاسبين زعما ترضاها لبنتك عارف في كلامي بك العين عارف مدامك بو ما ترضاش الشر لصغارك الور هذا ميساج عباره واحد من صغارك يحكي معاك من فرنسا رانا عايشين قالك لا باش ترى الشعب عايشين الذل وثاقوا من كاس عذاب رئيس البلاد شعبك مات برشا عباد من زبلة كلاد هاكا تشوف اش قاعد صاير في البلاد مآسي باردو وناس ما قادش وين تبات هاني نحكي باسم الشعب اللي ظلموا واللي داسوا بالصريح البلاد شعبك مات برشا عباد من زبلة كلاد هاكا تشوف اش قاعد صاير في البلاد مآسي باردو وناس ما قادش وين تبات هاني نحكي باسم الشعب اللي ظلموا واللي داسوا بالصريح رئيس البلاد قلت لي يحكي من غير خوف انا حكيت لكن عارف اللي نهايتي كان كفوف نشوف في برشا ظلم هذاك علاش اخترت كلام بورطا وصوني برشا عباد اللي نهايتي كان الاحلام لكن الى متى التونسي عايش في الاوهام وينها حريه التعبير ريت منها كان الكلام
Again, I want to talk about this notion of using popular culture, particularly rap music, which a lot of artistic activists around the world do use musical forms as well as performance and visual, partially because music, particularly popular music like rap music, is something that people are familiar with, young people are familiar with, and that they feel it's their own. Two artists, Human and KT, both from Senegal, both rappers from Senegal, had this idea that, well, young people in Senegal are really interested in rap music. And there was a sort of a political rap scene in Senegal, centered in Dakar, around this sort of political rap group or collective called Yen Amar. And what they noticed was that Myanmar could say things to young people that if they were politicians, nobody would listen to them. It was a vernacular language, a lingua franca of young people. And so they said, okay, well, it's great to be rappers, that's fine. But we want people to know what's going on in both their country and the world. We want to do the news. And so they created something called Journal Rappé, in which they rap the news both in French, you'll hear French, and then in Wolof, which is the largest non-European language in Senegal.
Microphone check, 1, 2. Salam alaikum. Bonjour. Ok. Bienvenue, installez-vous, on a des nouvelles pour vous. Il y a de bonnes, il y a de mauvaises, mais il y a des nouvelles pour vous. Bienvenue, installez-vous, on a des nouvelles pour vous. Il y a de bonnes, il y a de mauvaises, mais il y a des nouvelles pour vous. Incendie à la Médina, c'est talibés ont perdu la vie. Faut-il fermer des dards? Tout le monde n'est pas de cet avis.
On a tout tenté. Il y avait une fille à l'intérieur qui était en dormation avec son petit frère aîné.
Exploiter un enfant doit être puni comme un délit. Mais au Sénégal, ils font un drame pour que les langues se délient. Parlons maintenant du PDS et des biens mal acquis. La question n'est plus de savoir, ils ont fait du mal acquis. Certains deviennent transhumants, d'autres veulent prendre le maquis. Pour ne pas être les prochaines victimes du régime de Macky. Ils sont interdits de sortie du territoire national. Maître Ouad est indigné, il crie au scandale. Son fils, ancien ministre chargé du Sénégal, n'est pas un vandale. Il n'a pas à justifier combien il achète ses sandales. Mais à chacun ses problèmes, le Sénégalais veut du boulot. La baisse du coût de la vie, il veut du courant, il veut de l'eau. 5000 chômeurs vont ainsi devenir des fonctionnaires. Et comme on dit, il n'est jamais trop tard pour ne rien faire. Autre sujet d'actualité, c'est la crise malienne. Désormais la guerre est sale, c'est la guérilla urbaine. Mopti, Tombouctou, Gao sont des repères d'islamistes. Acmi en sardine, Moudjao, bref, des terroristes. Société pour finir, parlons de la crise des croyances. Les Sénégalais croient en Dieu, mais très peu lui font confiance. Au lieu d'envoyer leur prière à yalla.com, ils préfèrent consulter Selbe alias google.com. Ne zappez surtout pas, le Wolof c'est dans un instant. L'information sans chichi, le journal rappé. Ne partez surtout pas, le Wolof c'est dans un moment. La vraie information c'est ici, le journal rappé.
jage si leen déglu leen am nañ xibaar indi leen yi neex yeen naqari waaye yëppay jëm ci yéen jage si leen déglu leen am nañ xibaar indi leen yi neex yeen naqari jëm ci fukk ak juróom benn taalibe dee ci plak fële ca Médina askan bi seen mer nguur gi lañ koy yàq.
Essentially the same, but in Wolof. Another group that uses popular cultural forms are the performance artists Pussy Riot. And they've gotten quite a lot of, particularly for going into a Moscow church and performing punk songs, both critical of Vladimir Putin, as well as the Russian Orthodox Church. And again, using a cultural form, using art, in this case, music, to get forth a political idea and an idea, kind of raising awareness around certain issues. Now, Pussy Riot immediately got arrested. A number of their members spent a couple of years in jail. And there was a certain logic to that provocation because they wanted to particularly highlight their struggle outside of Russia. But arts and activism actually works very well for people living in repressive regimes that do not want to get arrested. And one of my favorite examples of this actually comes out of China in the southwestern city of Chongqing, where environmental activists declared a war on smog. Now, Chinese cities are famous for a couple of things. One is smog. Last time I was in China, I quit smoking because it didn't really matter because I felt like I was smoking every single day. And the smog is just absolutely horrendous. But if you're an environmental activist, what would we do in something like the United States? We'd go out in the streets, we'd hand out pamphlets, we'd get petitions signed and so on and so forth. Well, the other thing about China is that there's really no political recourse you can take on the streets. The Chinese authorities are incredibly paranoid about any sorts of street protests, even when they're in favor of the regime. And so you can't protest. If you protest on the street, you will get shut down immediately. So what these environmental activists did is they staged scenes on the streets of Chongqing, which were very typical of celebrations in China. one of the things that happens is before you get married, you parade around the city, photographers take your picture and so on and so forth. So you had a young couple that did all of that in their bridal veil and so on, but did it with gas masks. They also staged a dance performance of these, cute young girls and their tutus and all of that, but they're all wearing gas masks. And they called this the war on smog, taking a line from the government that they were declaring a war on smog and basically saying, your war is phony. What's wonderful about this is the passerby understood that this was a political protest. Even the police understood it was a political protest. But because it didn't announce itself as politics, it could get away with things that a politician or an activist could never get away with in China. It kind of slipped under the radar. If that's about taking action against the state, every once in a while the state engages in this. Antanas Mockus was elected the mayor of Bogota, Colombia. He was a philosophy professor, mathematics or philosophy professor. He was a professor from the university, quite a colorful character. And he decided that he was going to approach civil government very differently than in the past. Bogota is known for a lot of things. It's known for a drug trade. It's known for its beauty. It's also known for its traffic deaths. Horrible, horrible traffic deaths. People pay no attention to the stoplights. They pay no attention to the crosswalks. And it was becoming a real social problem. To make matters worse, the other thing that they were known for, or the traffic was known for, is having traffic officers who would shake people down for bribes. It's a notoriously corrupt traffic police. So Antanas Mockus, being the academic that he was, put out a survey. And he asked people why they didn't obey traffic laws and what might make them stop. And what he found out is that nobody had any respect for the law. The law was something that the police used to shake people down. So he knew increasing fines wasn't going to help at all. But what he did find is that people were very afraid of losing face, okay? It's a very machismo culture. It's all about presenting yourself publicly, having dignity. And so what Antanas Mockus did is he took all of the traffic police in the entire city of Bogota and fired them, 220 of them. And he hired mimes in their place. He also offered to hire back any traffic police who wanted to be a mime, but he hired mimes, 200 mimes to direct traffic. And instead of giving people fines, they humiliated them. They laughed at people. And they made it into this sort of massive spectacle of humiliation and praise. And traffic deaths dropped 50%. It actually worked. But it worked because he was willing to use a sort of toolbox that really worked around emotions and experiences, not fines and policing. He did a whole bunch of other brilliant urban experiments like this as well. Interestingly enough, it was so successful that it got exported to other cities around Latin America where it did not do as well. It went to Caracas. And in Caracas, it turns out that people didn't really care about public face and humiliation in the same way. So you had mimes, but it actually didn't work, which we'll get to a point I want to make in a few minutes. The last one I'm going to leave you with is actually from an artist. He's Chilean. His name's Alfredo Yar. And he's quite famous, actually. I think he's one of the best political artists alive right now. And when you're a famous artist, you get invited to places to do residencies. And so he was invited to Skoghall, Sweden, which every time I talk about this, I ask who's been to Skoghall, Sweden. I have yet to have anybody, even in Sweden, come from Skoghall, Sweden. And what Sweden is it's a factory town. It has one industry. They create this paper. It's the paper you use on things like milk cartons and so on and so forth. And the entire industry, it's all surrounded by forest, all those trees are ground up to make paper. The logs make the spindles on which the paper is wrapped. It is a paper town. And you work for the paper town, or you work for someone who services the paper factory. And as he was walking around, Alfredo Yar saw a beautiful library funded by the company. They saw a beautiful city hall funded by the company. And, you know, in Sweden, a company town is actually a really pretty good thing, okay? It's the social democracy. But it meant that basically everybody's needs were taken care of by either the social welfare state or the company or some combination thereof. They seemed to have everything they wanted. But the one thing they didn't have was a museum. And so what Alfredo Yar said is, I know what I'm going to do for my art project. I'm going to build a museum. And he built a museum out of the paper and the logs that was the main product of this town. There's a grand opening. People came. The mayor got the ribbon. It's all official. They had an oompa band, because that's what you do. And here you see people crowded opening night. And what happened is that, you know, all the local artists and kids who wanted to be artists and so on and so forth put their art up, and people walked around and looked at it and saw, oh, look, I never knew you were a landscape painter. That's amazing. That's wonderful. And everybody had a really good time. And then, you know, at some point, people looked around and it says 24-hour museum there. And so the question is, well, what do you mean 24-hour museum? Is it open 24 hours? And at a certain point, Alfredo Yar announced that, no, it's not open 24 hours. In 24 hours, I'm going to burn it to the ground. And that's what he did. He burnt it to the ground. And so you may be asking, how is this anything but a theater of cruelty? But Alfredo Yar is a very, very smart artist. And he burned it down and he left. Yeah, that's the other thing. He had to leave really quick, okay? And sure enough, 2 weeks later, he's in his studio in New York, that's where he lives now, and he gets a call from the mayor of Skoghall, Sweden. And the mayor says, for the first time in the history of the town, people have organized themselves and demanded that we build a museum. And they want you to build it. So he came back and built a museum, okay? Permanent, he didn't burn it down. The brilliance of that is that what he understood was these people that seemed to have everything, the one thing they didn't have was the desire to ask for something. And so he created something and then took it away from them. So they had to ask for it themselves. And when he told us this story, we're like, you are so brilliant. How did you know it was going to work? To which he said, I had no idea what it's going to work. And that's why he's a great artist. So there's 3 important lessons to learn from these. 1, these won't work for you, okay? They are completely contextual. All people have culture. All cultures are different. What works in Skoghall, Sweden is not going to work in Dakar, Senegal, and vice versa. It has to do with local context. And when we go work around the world, we always tell people, first thing you do is map your cultural terrain, because those are the signs and symbols and stories that are going to resonate with the people you're trying to reach. So in Chicago, if you're going to do artistic activism in Chicago, you got to think, who are the people I'm speaking to? What do they care about? Is it the Cubs? Is it Chicago hot dogs? I have no idea. That's all being outside of Chicago. I know about Chicago, that and deep dish pizza, okay? But that's why I should not be organizing in Chicago. It should be people who live in Chicago doing this sort of work. Context matters. But creativity comes from combination. That you can be inspired by these things and take a little bit from this and a little bit from that, put it together and create something new. And that's what I want to do right now. In the time that we have left, I want us to come up with some creative tactics that serve some objective, okay? And just to refresh our memories, those of you that are activists in the room, an objective is a doable goal, okay? You can have grand goals like world peace, but in order to get there, you need doable goals, like sign a treaty against nuclear weapons, okay? And so I just came up with an objective for us today, which is apropos of the moment, which is make sure the election board counts every vote. So we need to create tactics that move us towards that place where we can count every vote, where we can demand that the election board counts every vote. That brings us to the second, tactics. What is a tactic? Tactics are actions to bring about objectives. So a tactic can be a protest, it can be a march, it can be a sit-in, It can be street theater. It can be a public mural. It can be an art installation. It can be street posters. It can be a TikTok video, okay? Anything that actually moves us closer to our objective, which in this case is making sure that the local election board counts every vote, counts as a tactic. All right? That makes sense? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Krishna, how many people do we have on the call right now, Krishna?
Only 17.
17. Okay, let's divide that up into 4 groups. Okay, more or less. What is 4 times 4? 8? Yeah, that's good. Perfect. We'll divide into 4 groups. Okay, and you're gonna have 15 minutes to come up. Hold on. Oops. With 10 creative tactics. 15 minutes to come up with 10 creative tactics. Okay, and right now you're saying that is impossible. That's the whole point. If you think too much about it, you'll get stuck in, is it perfect? Is it the best one? Don't go there. Just come up with 10, okay? The first 7 have to be impossible, okay? Now this is really important. If we constrain ourselves to what is possible, we constrain our creativity. And so by asking for you to come up with impossible tactics, our creativity is free. What do I mean by impossible? I mean things that take too much time, too much money, that are against the laws of physics, time, and space. And so one might be, what we do is we levitate Wrigley Field and hold it over the election board and threaten to drop it on the election board if they stop counting the votes before every vote is counted. And when they're done, we'll put Wrigley Field back, okay? But until that time, it's going to hover over the election board, just like those big flying saucers hovering over the White House in all of those movies. Can't be done. That's okay. That's the point. And you got to do those first. Come up with the 3 possible ones after those. And I'll tell you why when we come back. And we were going to give you 20 minutes. You only got 15 minutes, which is even better. Okay? So again, tactics are creative actions to bring about objectives. And our objective is make sure the election board counts every single vote. All right. Any questions? And Krishna, you're going to have to read out the questions if people have them, or people can just pop up on screen.
Okay, so everybody's going to be bumped into breakout rooms now, and there should be at least like 1 IEC person in each. And Stephen, you'll be able to, I think,
go from one to the other. Great. And if anybody have any questions, put them in the chat. I can respond to them. And yes, do pick a spokesperson for your group, because when we come back, we're going to share our top 3, and then there's one last part of this. All right? So go forth, be creative. All right. Are we all back? Yes, great. Okay, so we don't have much time. That is my fault. But I would love to hear from each group what your most outlandish idea was, the one that got the most laughs amongst your group, or the one you were so embarrassed to write down. Abby, you want to start?
Sure, because I kicked it off and I made you laugh, so that was a good thing. I've been floored, and I've been searching for some humor these days, and I love the fact that now you're seeing a lot of memes that are bringing back the Count from Sesame Street. So I envision, let's get not only bring puppets or drawings, you get people dressed up as the Count, you get children involved to actually go and volunteer to help count, and to remember that how important counting is. We all can do it, and it all must be done. So I want to see the Count everywhere in different representations. Stephen reminded us, bring back the ancestors, his rest his peace, the actor who did his voice. We want to hear from everyone, and we want to talk about the Count. That was our silliest way, and that could be done in protest, art, music, you name it, many different ways. Bring back the Count.
I love it. And actually, I mean, as outlandish as that seems, it's completely doable, of course, right? The great thing about doing this sort of artistic activism is you only need 5 people. dressing up as the count. You go outside and you start counting, and then ask everybody to count along with you. And now you have 20 people, then 30 people, and so on. So it's completely doable. It starts as a silly idea, but it's actually totally doable.
And then everyone gets to enjoy going,
exactly, and wear the costumes.
Yes.
Exactly. Great visual. All right, from one of the other groups. That was group one. Group two. Yes, Kathleen. Oh, take yourself off mute.
Someone in our group had the idea of somehow affiliating each vote with, like, you know, infused notion of a soul, and the idea being that, you know, each has to be brought to term, right? Like, we figured we'd appeal to the pro-life nature of many folks who seem to be pro-life and not so pro-counting. That, you know, we tell them that it was their responsibility to nurture each one like a soul, and bring it to fruition. Then they can forget about it once it's counted. But
okay, so we know that votes don't have souls necessarily, right? How can we help this group make the impossible possible? What's an idea of making this doable?
We need each vote to actually cry out for, you know, the need to.
Okay, good, but votes can't cry. So what do we do?
But you said it's the impossible, so why would I go? Why would I limit myself to the possible in my?
But if it stays as the impossible, then we can't do it. The trick now is to take your wackadoodle ideas and figure out, like, how can we do them? So this is great, but you already
puppet theater. We'll have people present each vote, you know, crying out for how it wants to be nurtured and loved and cherished and counted.
Yes. So one of the things is you transform into theater. Good. Matthew, you had your hand up.
Schoolhouse Rock had the I'm Just a Bill cartoon. I'm Just a Vote seems like an obvious analog to that.
Yeah, exactly. And so votes can talk, votes can cry out. Once you move your way, okay, reality is not going to work. You can always do it as performance, right? But I love the idea. I don't know if we started out with, okay, this has got to be real, whether you'd come up with this idea of a vote having a soul, and that somehow it being akin to an unborn, you know, thing with potential. How else could we make this real?
You solicit famous musicians and actors in their voices.
Oh, yes, exactly. Because everybody's so used to that with cartoons as well, which actually would fit very well with Matthew's idea as well. Good. Awesome. Okay. If we had more time, we could brainstorm another 10 great ideas out of this. But I want to make sure it gets out on time because I hate when things go too long myself. So group number 3. Is anybody from group number 3 here?
You're muted.
Andrea, just speak up.
Unmute yourself. Oh, it won't let you. Okay.
Okay. I probably.
Okay, here we go.
There we go. Okay.
It said I needed permission from the host. So we talked about several different ideas, but one was visualizing the counting rooms because it seems to be so one-sided. There's this perception that it's all Democrats and they're just counting all of their mail-in ballots, and that there's no one representing the other party that can call it out. So we're thinking maybe like the idea of like a Zoom bomb, you know, like there's some Wizard of Oz head like popping into each counting room and making sure there's enough of each party being represented, or something silly, but just so the idea gets across that it's not, you know, one-sided counting rooms for one party.
Okay, I love it. Okay, so let's do a little brainstorming about what are different ways that we could visualize the idea of that there's nothing going on behind closed doors, or what really is going on behind closed doors. There's a Republican, there's a Democrat, and then there's the worker. Because I think you're right, that most people don't understand that that's what the process is. It doesn't fit into their conspiratorial worldview. So how could we do that?
I don't know. I had another idea that was more practical about.
No, let's stay with the unpractical. The practical is easy, okay? You can do that on your own time. The whole point of having all these smart people is to take those wacky ideas and figure out how to make them practical.
Yeah, I really like maps. I was thinking some kind of like local visualization with numbers representing parties in each voting location, but that is more practical. So if anyone else wants to chime in with the impractical, that'd be good.
Any idea about how we could visualize what actually happens? Esther, it looks like about, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that the part of the problem is because it seems so nefarious, is that actually maybe what you want is for it to look as boring as it really is, which is just people counting, and some way to just make it look, I mean, in one sense, you just really want what's actually happening, which is just people doing, just like opening envelopes, maybe like, getting a paper cut, like having them all their paper cuts, from opening all these envelopes, and like the paper not flattening properly, and just like wrestling with paper, or something, it's just like, it's kind of like some kind of scene, almost like from, like one of those old, those like, the kind of sitting in cubicles and just like the maybe redoing like the I Love Lucy.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Chocolate, they're like trying to count votes and I mean, the problem is we don't want them sticking them in their shirts or something, but
right. But to make it a performance of banality. What a great idea.
It's just they're counting votes, and it's just pieces of, right. I mean, it's important, but like there's nothing nefarious happening here. It's just opening it, like
make it the most boring web series ever.
Yeah.
And launch it as the most boring web, so you can make a trailer for the most boring movie ever. The vote count.
Yeah.
12 hours later, they're still doing it. They're still doing it. Yeah, I love it. I love it. All right, last group. Group number 4. What did you come up with? Give us your worst. Anybody from group 4?
Sure, I can. Oh, those Christian ones. I'm just afraid of my internet load is interfering with the recording a little bit, so I'm gonna have to leave my video off.
Sure.
I'll just quickly spitfire, I think, 3 ideas. We had some, like the count was already out there. We also talked about that too.
Oh, good.
So the first one was building a wall, but around the White House with every vote has a Lego block. Everyone gets a Lego block, and we build a wall around the White House, and nobody can leave until they acknowledge all the votes. Just trapping people. And then the next one is having like a mass, like there are TV shows like this, but doing this on like a nationwide scale, like a job reversal kind of mandate where all current essential workers get to sit on their butt like the billionaires are, and then all the millionaires and billionaires have to work the essential jobs. And then we had another idea. The election process, voting process actually takes to extend it. So, and we kind of wanted to address like the voting inequity. And so we're like, okay, let's think of a way that we can go the most out of our way to collect votes from people in the most direct and easy way possible. And we're thinking, what if we have like a voting sort of Avon lady that just comes around everyone's house for, I guess the voting process will take years or something, or the whole 4 years. And yeah, she comes to your house with a box full of information. She's here to like educate you on everything and collects your vote right there. Something like that. Yeah, so those are my Spitfire. Yeah, unless Krishna, you want to add we had a satellite image idea that Krishna had, if you want to elaborate on.
Oh yeah, we like on the topic of gerrymandering, having like people either like put glow sticks down along the borders of their gerrymandered district, or I actually thought to synthesize the Lego block idea to like have people put their vote Lego block on the borders of their gerrymandered districts and like see physically how it interfered with their daily commute or seeing their next door neighbor or whatever.
Nice. Well, so this is the beautiful sort of thought process, which if you start out with this thing that's not going to happen, let's face it, building a Lego block wall around the entire White House, but then your brain kind of almost automatically starts to think, how could we make it happen? And yeah, we can't do that, but we could do a little line across a gerrymandered, and then build it up, maybe get kids to bring stuff and bring their blocks. And all of a sudden the impossible is becoming possible. But again, I explained this to one group, when I've forgotten and to tell people to start with the impossible and they start with the possible, it kind of jams it up. And if you start out with the really silly stuff, it allows you to expand and think about ideas you never thought of before. So anytime you're brainstorming on anything, let's do things we can't do. And then later backtrack with what we can do. Because that is up to think, I think, new and creative and powerful ways. I'm cognizant of the time, and I think I'm in control of the meeting now. So, Krishna, you're gonna have to tell me what to do. But it's been a real experience being with you during this. And yeah, I hope to meet you in person someday. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Thank you so much, Stephen. We do have time for questions. And so, I mean, I think until 1 o'clock, Stephen, if you're available to stay around, you're welcome to. So if there are any questions from the audience, that'd be great. But yeah, Stephen, thank you so much for, presenting this amazing workshop and project for students.
Sure, no problem. I am around for questions for a little bit. Someone just found my son's lost mobile phone, so I will have to jump off for 2 minutes to call the person back, but I'll jump back on, okay?
Hey, Stephen.
Hey.
So Stephen is back now, so if folks have any questions for him, now's the time.
How can we get more information about your organization?
I think there was a link that was put up in the chat, but it is very simple, c4aa.org.
Okay, c4aa.org.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll look at the link.
Yeah, and then I'll add a link right too for case studies of artistic activism from around the world. Just if you're ever looking for inspiration, it's actually a place I go to. It's all user generated too. Actipedia, whoops, I spelled that wrong, sorry. Actipedia.org.
I had a question.
Sure.
So I'm an artist myself, and I'm wondering how, when thinking about arts and activism, there's also a lot of conversation of activism within arts and also reform in the arts as well. Right. So, and making art responsibly, because there is a lot of room for abuse within the current institutional structures that we have. Mm-hmm. And there's also a trend too, I've been seeing and personally experienced. There is like a lot of interest in, let's say, like stories of color. It's kind of been commodified, and then it's all well intentioned, but often there's situations where the power structures behind, like say, like a Broadway production of like an August Wilson play are. Everyone on the board is white and the director is white, and yes, the actors are Black, but the power structures behind the production are problematic, right? Mm-hmm. So when thinking about using arts and activism, I don't know, I feel like there's inevitably this question of making art responsibly as well. So I wonder what your perspective is on that question and that dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I think activism begins at home. And so the best the best one could do is as an artist in an exploitative situation, and I think arts is very exploitative, is to use your talents as an artist to turn it back and be an activist within that sphere itself. And I was actually just doing one of the kind of a online conference with law school in Canada, and they are really taking on the issue of particularly pay for artists and making sure that artists aren't exploited. But what was interesting about it is that they were doing it through lobbying. And I was like, well, that's great. So do you have the performers perform in front of the lobbyists? And they were like, no, we just go in the lobby. It's like, it felt like a completely lost opportunity. And I think that just as activists often divorce their creative life, because we all have a creative life, from their activism when they do serious activist work, I think artists sometimes divorce their artistry when they step into that activist sphere for their own rights. And so I think it would be really potentially powerful is if sort of the actors from, an August Wilson play, went out on the street and started performing and made some of the, I don't know, something, but use some of that artistic skill within the organizing itself.
Thank you.
Yeah. But long story short is we don't work on that necessarily. We tend to step outside the world of culture and institutional critique, mainly in no real reason other than a lot of artists are already working in that space, which I think is great.
Stephen, I was wondering if you could a little bit on how the workshop you did today might be like turned into a classroom unit or expanded into like a series of classes.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. The easiest way to think about any sort of like doing something like this is when we do it in a workshop, you got a little bit of the history of activism, you got a little bit about the contemporary example case studies, a little bit about the theory, and then a little bit of the practice of how to do it. And so each one of those could be separated out into a unit. And so one of the workshops we did, we actually get very well paid by the Soros Foundation. And so what that allows us to do is a lot of free workshops. And so we've done free workshops in, for example, New York City public schools, right? And working with art teachers. And what we will do is we'll come in for one class a week over the space of like 6 weeks, and we'll do one unit just on history, one unit just on case studies, asking the students to bring in case studies, which inspire them, so they become teachers who have an expertise. And then one sort of unit on why artistic activism, that sort of introductory exercise I had you do, which is why the importance of reaching people's emotions. And then we spent a lot of time then on them creating their own creative actions. And at each stage, sort of helping them think through, okay, let's start with a list of impossible ones. Now let's make it possible. Now go and perform it and have your other friends watch it or see it or what have you and give you feedback, and then take that feedback, integrate it into making it better, think about your audience. And so you could think about half of it being a build up to a project, and then the other half being a creation of the project and then revising the project. Because one of the faults, I'd say, of a lot of artistic activism is people think a lot about what do I want to do, what do I want to do, and then they do it once, then they walk away from it. And we really push people to think about it as just like when you're practicing for a play, you practice it over and over and over, and it gets better and better each time you do it. To bring that sort of artistic thinking of the creative process into the work itself. And so they revise it and they revise it and they revise it over a course of 2 or 3 weeks. And then we'll do a final sort of perform it out in public. And then also have observers watch it there, and we come back, what did we learn from actually doing it in public? And then the final question we always ask people is, if we were to do this again, what would you do differently and why? Because then that gets them thinking in terms of, this is just an iteration for some future project.
Could I chime in, Krishna? Yeah. I was really taken by your comment, Stephen, towards the end of your larger presentation about, having gone through all of those wonderful, really inspiring examples and go, they're not going to work for you because you have to kind of keep your local context. which I absolutely agree that what works in one place isn't going to work in another. And yet beyond, how do you then kind of, but it's still valuable to look at these other examples.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that tension, and how would you encourage educators to, like we just learned about all this stuff, and now I'm telling you, if you want to go use it, you have to,
right.
How do you kind of help educators or students find what's useful in that, even if the actual specific activity or art that was created isn't transferable?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it comes to that last thing, which is the creativity that comes from combination, which is you become inspired by something, then realize, oh, that's not going to work here. But instead of bicycles, let's use whatever the local transport is, or what have you, right? And then it becomes something that you can transform. I'm trying to think of a good specific example. Here's a good example. So remember the traffic mimes? Those traffic mimes, when they exported into places like that, it didn't work very well. But I just saw another place, I think it was New Zealand, where they were trying to draw attention to the fact that people were going through the zebra stripes, right? And so what they did is they hired people to dress up in zebra outfits. And it wasn't mimes, it wasn't making fun of people. That may not have worked in New Zealand for all I know, but it was these big friendly zebras telling you what to do. There's obviously someone who's very inspired by what Antanas Marcus had done, but it shifted it around to make it work in New Zealand. I know New Zealand does not have a zebra population, but still. It would work very well in East Africa.
Thank you. Yes.
And by the way, I think this is what artists do all the time, right? Is they're like, oh, I like that. What happens if I put it over there? And they put those things together.
All right, well, given that we're kind of approaching the end of the time we have, I wanted to thank Stephen again for a wonderfully engaging workshop, which we wish could have been in person, but I'm glad to have you nonetheless. And I wanted to turn it over to Esther.
Okay, I'm going to leave now, and wonderful to see all of you, and good luck with the end.
Thanks so much, Stephen.
Take care. Bye-bye.